over the years then, what I remember the most about her was about how she wouldn't let anything go out of the house.
Like no waste?
In terms of waste.
Okay.
So she would make you eat an orange right down to you're gnawing on the white part of the orange. If it was an egg, she would say, clean that eggshell out. I'd say, Grandma, that's clean. Nope, that's not clean. Clean that eggshell out. There's still more in there. Get in there.
We actually call her grandmother Ying, which is the Chinese word for grandmother on the father's side of the family.
I called him Grandpa Foot.
We, in our native language, in Hindi, we call them Dada and Dadi.
My other grandmother would be Maman Bozorg, which is Persian for grandmother.
Mchechu means old woman in Kinyarwanda.
I called her Safta, which is a Hebrew word for grandma.
Everybody called her Mamitita.
We called her Mima and Dede.
Grandma.
Hi, I'm Steph.
And I'm Robin. Welcome to Stories from Grandparents,
the podcast where we share stories about and from grandparents.
The survivalist mentality is something that I think was very prevalent for my grandmother. I think it is a kind of an international experience of that generation, just because they went through, world wars. They went through a lot of conflict. And so my grandmother was very thrifty, let's say, which is, I think, a kind of generational thing. And I remember when we cleared out her apartment, when she passed, we just found so much stuff that we were shocked by. But at the same time, there were things there that...
Some stuff?
I mean, the amount of lentils and dried goods stored there really could have put us through a nuclear winter.
An unreasonable amount of lentils.
A completely unreasonable for a single woman living alone. We were just like, what on earth are we going to do with this? And that was one thing. But at the other side of it, there were so many cool things that I found that I was so happy to see. One was this ashtray made of silver that my mom remembered they had back in their house in Iran, which is probably the only thing that I know that they have from back then, as well as a photo album. And then there was my grandfather's old radio from the 1950s. That looked like you could crank it to work. I mean, that was so cool. I was so happy about that. But this spirit of saving things, you never know when you'll need it. It wasn't necessarily kept for nostalgia. I think she kept that radio for nostalgia, probably.
But there's a hoarding mentality. There's a just in case mentality.
Yeah, she's getting ready for the apocalypse.
Mm-hmm. A little bit.
It really, and
she's experienced it twice.
Yeah. She's experienced it twice. So you're like, I can't blame you.
Yeah. Try to tell her that was an unreasonable amount of lentils. She'll be like, I'll tell you. Yeah.
Right, exactly. I'm sure she'd be mortified by my minimalism and how I throw things away or give them away. And she's like, why would you do that? But, there were things where she, you couldn't treat her in the I guess the treat yourself kind of way, but you couldn't make her or do anything really extravagant for her because she would feel so bad and be like, why are you doing this? So we would constantly come up with different stories for what kind of discount we got or how it was free. And I remember one of her good friends' son, who was really sweet and take care of her, from when while we weren't there, obviously, and told her that, I got these New Year's Eve tickets to a party with Persian music, but they're free, so you should absolutely come. And so he lied to her, even though they were $100 each, and took her. And so she went to that, and I sent you both actually a video of her dancing with him.
Oh,
and
amazing.
She would dance for one or, a minute, and then she would get tired and she'd flick her wrist and just be like, okay, go away now, I'm done. And it's a great move. But yeah, I think that thriftiness and, just kind of was hard to really take care of her in a good way. When we had her 90th birthday party, we all came out there And, you know, we wanted to rent out like some kind of restaurant and have a private room and just like food, nothing fancy, like not even a super fancy place. And she just had a fit. She would not allow it. And we eventually compromised to allow catering, but we still had to do it at her apartment building. And so just like, you know, that constant struggle was a bit much, because I think you'd also, like you said, like she expects you to act that way in certain ways. But she was much harder on herself than the rest of us, for sure.
And one of my favorite stories of her, when I was a young fella, I stayed with them, and the farm had, by and large, gone into, you know, they just couldn't make a go of it. But they had this little general store, and I spent a lot of time with them. And I'd say, "Grandma, would you like a cup of tea?" And, you know, English people love their tea. And she'd say, "Oh, I'd love a cup of tea." And she was ill by now. She had some illnesses. And I said, "Would you like me to put in a new bag?" "Oh, no, don't. No, just use the old bag." But, you know, I would slip in another bag. And then she'd use that to rub her eyes. So afterwards so, you know, that you reusing the tea until it was just about, you could taste it. And then using the tea bag to rub your eyes and make your eyes a little bit better. I don't know if tea does that.
I've heard that.
Have you?
Yeah, I have heard that. My grandmother didn't do that, but I have heard of that.
Yeah.
Like,
so
cool tea.
Yeah. But they never threw anything out. The Depression was hard. For a lot of people, they think the Depression in Canada in the 30s was mostly in Western Canada. But, you know, in those rural communities, things were really, really tough. So they just didn't waste anything. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of my memory that she passed on about not wasting anything, making sure you clean up your meal. I have a favorite story I like to tell about her, where I was sitting with her and I said, "Grandma, what's this?" And she said, it was yellow. And she said, "It's corn." She knew I liked corn. I said, "Grandma, that doesn't look like corn." She says, "It's corn." It was actually squash. She said, "Eat it up. It's corn." I said, "Grandma, that doesn't look like any corn I've seen." She says, "No, it's corn. Eat it up." She knew I wouldn't eat the squash, but and I was a picky eater in those days. But yeah, my memories of her were you know, about saving, watching your money, and lots of stories about how tough things were, and how she survived in some very difficult economic conditions. Very difficult.
I remember one time buying a pair of shoes, and I lived with my grandparents, who we were talking about earlier. And my grandpa thought that was so decadent, because I was like, "Well, Grandpa, I had to buy new shoes because my current shoes had a hole in them." And he was like, "Oh, a hole in your shoe." Like, he's just like, and then he just launched into some story about, because he lived in Melbourne when he was young, and I guess it used to rain more there. And then he moved to Sydney, and all the boys at the school in Sydney had like tiny little, probably nicer shoes than him, and he had big boots for wading around in the rain. And so he was telling me a story just about how big and ugly his boots were, and all the other kids had, you know, nice little shoes. Anyway, so that was his story he offered to me when he thought I was decadently buying a new pair of shoes, which I actually needed, but okay.
yeah, for sure.
I could tease them for also being like real big savers. I guess they didn't have a lot when they first got married, and so like they saved absolutely everything, jars and screws and like plastic containers, and like their garage was just a sight to see, which I had the wonderful opportunity to empty it when they had to move into a smaller home. It was sort of between second and third year, and I didn't have a summer job that year, so I went home and anyways, that was my summer job, emptying out all the stuff that they had. So I would definitely share some of those funnier sides of them. And I remember this one time I was helping my brother in her garage, and this was after my grandfather passed, and she was 91 when she died, so it was towards the end of her life. And I don't know, Adam is like he's a lot more, good with his hands and sort of a stronger of the Caracato brothers. And anyways, I'm helping him and clearly like not doing a good job. And my grandmother, who was always super nosy and would watch from the porch, like everything that was going on, she calls me over and then she just like whispers in my ear and says, "Don't worry, Belenana, your job is with the pen and the paper." As a way to subtly let me know that my future needed to be in the professional line and not like with my hands.
Thank you for listening to Stories from Grandparents. If you have any interest in submitting stories or if you want to participate on the podcast, please send us an email at storiesfromgrandparentspodcast@gmail.com.